We are going to, it's my clock show, one clock shows 2 o'clock, the other shows 1:59, but I am officially recording our session today, um, so that we have a record of it so that we can post it on our commission website. And for those of you who arrived as we're getting started, if you want to go ahead and work quietly until we ramp things up as we get a few more people joining us.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I have not presented on Google Meets before, so are we just pushing the present now when we want to show the PowerPoint?
Well, if you press on it, don't be scared to press on it. You'll see options. If you tap on it, you're going to have the choice of your entire screen, a window, or a tab. And as you can see, the tab is the preferred choice for video and presentation, but it requires that your tab be, that means it's one of your browser tabs. And so that means you would have had to bring your presentation into Google Slides. So if you have not and you still have it in PowerPoint, then you're going to either want to do your window or your screen.
Okay.
Then the challenge becomes, regardless, you may not see, and depending on your screen setup, you may see no other people in the meeting, which is why you're going to listen for let me just click, you're going to hear, I believe you should be able to audio hear. See that little plung? Did you hear it? It was a raised hand sound.
I didn't hear the sound.
Okay.
Now I did.
Okay, good. Okay. So when you are coming on your last minute of your session, I will be the one that, you know, in old-fashioned times when we went to a conference, there was a polite person sitting in the front row who had a little piece of paper with a 1 minute written in Sharpie. So my one minute warning is the raised hand during your talk, if that makes sense. So that means you will signal that you're 4 minutes in and you'll need to wrap up. Okay. So for those of you who were just joining us, I was giving a brief lesson in the presentation features of Google. If you're not familiar with it, you would use that. It's like an arrow in a box called Present Now, and you would choose among them, depending on whether or not you have a PowerPoint or whether you have Google Slides. You would share either your entire screen, a window, or a tab. If you're going to share a tab, you have to actually have your presentation in Google Slides, not PowerPoint. I'm sure the vast majority of us work in the Microsoft Office Suite environment, which means you probably have a PowerPoint, which means you would want to reference your window or your entire screen. So I've somewhat done things out of order, but I'm going to go ahead because we do have a good group here. Again, another feature, if you want to see more of the presenters, there's a default, the 3 little dots, like the little stacked snowman right next to your box with the arrow, gives you a whole bunch of choices. If you select on it, one of them is change layout. And if you change the layout, you can go from auto, which presumes something for you, to tiled, which means that as more people join, or if you pick tiled, you can actually use the sliding screen at the bottom to have more and more tiles showing. And if you close that, then you will get to see more and more people on your screen. So anyway, okay. We are having the vast majority of you join us. My name is Dr. Barbara Schmertz. I am the Director of Research and Policy Analysis for the Maryland Higher Education Commission, and the one who communicated with all of you who so generously gave of your time this afternoon on a lovely December day, at least here in Baltimore, but a busy time for all of us as we get ready for the holiday and the end of the term. So we do appreciate, know that some of you may not be able to stay for the full amount of time, but hope that you all can join in, because this session does end with ideally a robust discussion amongst all of you. So my job is as administrator of the session and sort of logistics extraordinaire. I will quickly turn this over to Commissioner McDaniels, who will make some introductions. So you all received an agenda, and just a brief summary. We're going to be starting off with 2 sessions back to back from the community colleges. And the way this is going to work is every presenter will have a 5-minute window in which to speak. And then there's a brief window in which there's questions asked by the commissioners in particular, because the goal here is the commissioners to learn more about you and your good work. Then we go into a two-team system for the University System of Maryland. We then have a presentation from Morgan State. We then have a presentation from St. Mary's. Then we have another 2 teams from the state-aided independent institutions, ideally wrapping up around 3:30 to then open it up for conversation amongst all, as well as additional conversations once the commissioners have heard from all of you. Just for those of you who came in late, the way I'm going to signal to you that you are 4 minutes into your session is I'm going to use this feature, the raised hand. It does not mean I'm actually going to ask you a question. It's just a gentle nudge to say you've got 1 more minute to wrap up. I will give everybody 5 minutes. And so if conversation bleeds in, know that we're not going to shortchange anybody's presentations, but we do appreciate that you will be keeping it to 5 minutes. So without further ado, Commissioner McDaniels.
Thank you, Dr. Schmertz, and good afternoon, everyone. I want to first start by commending all of our presenters in our meeting today on the very important work that each of you is doing at your individual institution to expand the opportunities for our students, just not only at your institution, but across Maryland. We recognize that it is very important work. We also thank you, as Dr. Schmertz said, for investing your time this afternoon to participate in our discussion. Just as a brief background, the DEI committee of MHEC was just formed just over a year ago in October of 2021. And we felt to do our work effectively, we needed to educate ourselves certainly on what's going on currently across the state and understand some of the challenges that you face during the, again, important work you do. The DEI committee of MHEC is made up of 2 commissioners, myself and Dr. Ray Serrano, who's on. And then we also have members of the MHEC staff, Ms. Glenda Abney and Bryson Barksdale, along with Dr. Schmertz, who kind of keep us from going off the rails too much and keep us focused on what we're supposed to be doing. So again, with that, just as an introduction, again, we really appreciate, we're very excited to hear your presentations and educate ourselves. So I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Schmertz to get us going. So thank you again.
Thank you. So let me discuss one more logistical item, which is the ways in which the commissioners themselves and or the audience members would like to ask questions of the presenter. So as I indicated, the sessions for Q&A after the blocks of presentations are really dedicated mostly to the commissioners. I don't want to lock people in, but there is time left at the end for everyone to join and have a discussion. But we all know from having done this for what seems like an eternity now with COVID, staying muted is key. So when you have an opportunity or a wish to raise your hand or ask a question, I would suggest that you either raise your hand if you want to actually talk, or use the comment feature if it's more of a comment. And I will, and my colleagues, Glenda and Bryson in particular, will monitor all for, especially the comments, for the ways in which there may be overlapping questions or themes or things that people want to call out. So without further ado, I am unsure whether the representative from CCBC is here. There you are, thank you. Forgive me, my laptop screen is very tiny and all of you are very tiny within my tiny screen. So we are going to go with the presentation from CCBC from 2:10 to 2:15, followed by the presentation from Prince George's Community College from 2:15 to 2:20. So without further ado, why don't you go ahead and share your slides?
Okay, can you see that?
We can.
Okay. So thank you for bringing us together for this meeting today. I'm Jadi Omawale, and I'm co-chair of CCBC's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Advisory Council. The council began to meet in fall of 2020 with a charge from our president, Dr. Sandra Kurtinitis, and we brought 35 members of our faculty, our staff, our students, and their leadership together to begin to do this work at the college. Our broad definition of diversity is race, ethnicity, gender, age, ability, religion, economic status, sexual preference, gender identity, national origin, and opinion. Our methods that we use was, our first step was to identify and discuss as a council CCBC's DEI challenges, and these came from the president's charge. Because the challenges were many, we decided to divide our 35-member council into roundtables that would address one DEI issue. Our roundtables are small work groups, and they're focused on a single diversity, equity, and inclusion topic. These groups are comprised of council members with the addition of interested or expert CCBC staff, students, and faculty, etc. The roundtables don't make CCBC policy, but discuss and study the focus area and make one or more recommendations. And then at the end of their work, the roundtable members will present those recommendations to the full council. These are our roundtables: faculty and staff diversity, which includes promotion and retention challenges, particularly for faculty and staff of color; accessibility; student involvement, which is a student-run roundtable, so students can speak on their own particular challenges; tackling incidents of bias; council communications; the achievement gap, we like to call it the equity gap; and diversity climate survey. We would say that the two major challenges for CCBC has been and continues to be hiring of faculty and staff from diverse backgrounds, as well as the equity gap, AKA achievement gap. And we've done a lot of work on those two particular issues. How we use the data. We always have been data-driven in the work that we do. Our first meetings in 2020 in the fall began with reports from Planning, Research, and Evaluation Department and covered what we knew or thought we knew. However, early on, we knew right away, pretty much, we wanted to do a diversity climate survey, and we created our own. We wanted to take the temperature of the CCBC employees and eventually the students as well. So how do we use the data thus far in terms of current decisions and future planning? Data from PRE is shared was shared in our few months of meetings and covered a breakdown of employee data. We looked at employee numbers first. That data was used by the Hiring for Diversity Roundtable to begin their work. We also focused on student achievement gaps and student population numbers. We are a minority-majority institution, and we use those for both the GAP Roundtable as well as the Student Roundtable. The Diversity Climate Surveys, one for faculty and employees, and the Student Climate Survey have both been done. And right now we've already looked at data from the employee survey, and we're currently looking at data from the student survey. So after meeting this past academic year, our 7 roundtables actually made 3 to 5 recommendations each, and those have gone on from our president to our vice presidents, who are taking a closer look at the recommendations with an eye to what can be implemented realistically. And our first VP reports began this fall. Our work is not done. We're actually continuing to work in our roundtables to go deeper, and the recent student survey is going to help provide more data to help us do this work. Okay.
Thank you very much. Well done. 4:56. You must have timed yourself very well.
Yes,
Um,
it is.
Yeah, so good work. So we will follow up. I will start the stopwatch again as Prince George's Community College goes ahead and shares their slides. You are currently muted, Andrew.
That didn't work for me. Let me try a window. Okay. Okay, are you able to see that?
We are.
Okay, because I can't see you, as you said.
I warned you, yes. So that just keep an ear out for my hand.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Good
Thank you.
Good afternoon, and I'm happy to be here to share a few things with you about Prince George's Community College. I'm Andrestine Robinson, the Chief Diversity Officer, and I also serve as the Chair of our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. Our diversity definition is a board-approved definition, which talks about how we support and embrace diversity, and we understand that to be the creation and promotion of an inclusive, non-discriminatory environment for everyone. And we have listed here all of the differences that we accept and value as a part of that definition of diversity, and how we support the growth and success of our students and our community and our employees. In terms of preparation for the future, I just cited one example for you as we look at data, how we plan for things. We are also a majority minority institution. And several years ago, we discovered that as looking at our demographics in the county, that we were significantly beneath the Hispanic Latino population at the college. So we planned a targeted approach to increasing the employees and students of this particular demographic at the college. And as we prepare for them, we've done some significant increasing of those, more so in the student population than the employees, because we too have some concerns with getting additional employees in this demographic. But we have planned in our next DEI to do some additional things related to supporting the Hispanic and Latino members with resources and hiring of bilingual employees in the languages that represent our student population, as well as making sure that we use inclusive branding as a part of the college's marketing. We have one real challenge right now, and that is understanding and addressing some recent racial concerns that have come up among some of the faculty. And that is something that we are working on at the moment. We use a lot of data to inform our DEI decisions, and we've listed them here. We use two for students, the CESI and the Race and Ethnicity Survey, which we did this year for the first time. The CESI, we have supplemental questions for DEI. We do a student experience survey every semester now. We started that during the pandemic so that we can get a sense of what students are feeling about their experience now. And
Ms.
then
Robinson, I'm sorry, excuse me, Ms. Robinson, can you go ahead and start from the current slide, because your slides are not advancing as you speak.
Okay, so I need to go back. Should I stop sharing?
I don't think you need to. We literally, if you just go up to the top and say from the current slide, we can see your screen where your slides are, so that one.
Okay, did you see that?
Oh, no, we're not.
Okay.
So can you go ahead and scroll to the slide you're on? I think you're going to have to just scroll there. I'm sorry to interrupt your presentation.
That's
It's just
okay.
that you were referencing a slide that we're not
see
able to see.
Challenging issue right now?
We are literally seeing your cover slide only.
Okay. I'm sorry about that.
I'm sorry I didn't notice it earlier. And I will pause the timer while we sort that out.
Okay, if I go back to from beginning.
Yeah, we're not seeing any change in your session presentation. I'm
wondering if I should stop sharing and go back again.
Okay, why don't you try that? We can all learn from your opportunity here for learning.
Okay. Okay, can you see anything right now?
We just see you talking as well. Well, depending on your layout, I see like 20 squares. So I see nothing other than the audience. Are you trying to bring it up again?
Yes. Okay, can you see the slides?
It's the same layout as before, where we see all of them, but you're now moving through them. So perhaps you could now just move
Do
to the
that.
one you were. Yes, I think
Okay.
that's the solution for now. I'm sorry. All right, I will start the
Okay.
timer again.
Challenging issues. You saw that. I was talking about the DEI data.
Yes, and you referenced this
Okay.
list, and we couldn't see your list. That's
Exactly.
what prompted me. That's
So
okay.
So right now we're in the midst of doing the PACE for our employees, and we have supplemental DEI questions for the PACE as well. We also look at our strategic plan indicators and our performance accountability report information. And right now we're in the midst of doing TRHT focus groups and a climate survey. So just want to talk a little bit about TRHT because that's something new for us. We were selected as AAC&U as one of 19 new TRHT campus centers, Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation centers in 2020. We actually launched our center in January of 2022. We work in conjunction with the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Committee. And this is just an example of how we will be using data to inform institutional decisions. One of the goals of the TRHT Center is to identify and examine and dismantle structural barriers to racial equity at the college. And we are doing that now by the identification we're doing through focus groups, which we have been doing for 2 semesters, as well as a climate survey, which we will do in the spring, along with all of the other data sources that we use. We will then present those findings, and we will recommend changes in practices and policies and systems at the college, as well as make some curriculum changes as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. And I, as a point of wisdom and advice for those of you, I will make a better point of letting you know whether or not I see your slides advancing earlier in the session. So thank you very much for your composure under pressure and for being a guinea pig on how this may work for others and their slides. So we are not that far off of our time frame, and I do want to open it up for questions from our commissioners. We have till 2:30 for a brief question and answer with these 2 community colleges. So Commissioner McDaniels, Commissioner Serrano, the other members of the committee, feel free to unmute yourself and ask questions of your 2 presenters. And I will also use a 1-minute signal when we're about to start up, need to start up with the next session.
Thank you. This is Chuck McDaniels again. I would like to ask, I guess, both of our presenters if there's any routine collaboration among the community colleges in the DEI arena, because I would imagine you share some of the same challenges. I just wonder how, are you working in a silo or independently, or do you all have forums that put you together to kind of come up with some common strategies? Great question. Thank you. I actually happen to co-chair the Maryland Community College Diversity Roundtable, which is a group for the 16 Maryland community colleges to come together. We used to meet monthly. We're now meeting every other month. And so we actually just had our first in-person meeting at Montgomery College a couple of weeks ago since the pandemic. But we do meet regularly. Every 2 months we meet. Yeah. And we discuss common concerns and issues. We are a sounding board for each other. We share best practices. We share what we're working on at the institution.
we have professional development usually at each of our meetings. So we talk about the reports that we have to do. We're talking about climate surveys right now, and some of us are writing new diversity plans. So we've been discussing that.
Thank you.
Thank you both for the presenters from PG and CCBC for the presentation and information. Just for one question, through these various working groups, surveys, roundtables, and conversations with faculty, staff, and students, could you just name maybe one or two barriers for equity gaps that you all have found at your institution, and maybe speak to how has the process been with making those recommendations to implement a resolution for those barriers?
You want to go first?
Okay. One that comes immediately to mind is the roundtable that is focused on equity gaps, essentially the gap between white students and students of color, and closing that gap. One of the things that we focused on and recommended to the Office of Instruction, the provost in the Office of Instruction, VP, was to really get focused on retention. Because we feel like at the college, we do a great job of getting students into the door, but we are not, the numbers are showing that we are not keeping our students, and that we should really get focused, especially for students of color, on retention issues. What exactly is going on there? Why are we not keeping students? So we've been doing a lot of research on that internally and externally to see what others are doing. And one of the recommendations from the roundtable that the college has taken up is to start a Retention Matters campaign, where we're really focused on drilling down all the way to the classroom, what kinds of things we can put in place, mechanisms to put in place to really hold on to our students, to give them what they need, so that they can continue their journey at the college. So that was one thing that everyone could get on board with right away. And so that's a campaign that's really just starting to warm up at the college in terms of getting those numbers up, those percentages up in terms of retaining our students.
So we're on the front end of our focus groups in terms of getting a qualitative analysis of them done. We have 6 different people doing the focus groups, so I have not done many of the student focus groups. That data is coming in, and we will be passing that on to an external consultant who will do the data analysis for us. So at this time, I can't really say much about what the students are saying in terms of equity gaps on their part. I do know there's some concern from employees, particularly faculty, around tenure and promotion that's coming up in some of their focus groups. But we really won't have a good sense of what we found until after we do the qualitative analysis.
Thank you very much.
We have time for, it's my clock says 2:27, so I don't know if Commissioner Serrano or Glenda, you would like to ask any questions, or we can move on to the other sessions.
Yes, hello everyone. I do have a question. Glenda Abney from MHEC. There's a term I use called diversity within diversity. My question is, and I know that every institution needs to address, recruit, and retain Hispanic populations, but is there a plan within that to look within the Hispanic populations, or is it still being left as a broad topic as Hispanic? Are we looking at where our Hispanic students are coming from and to be able to address those needs as well? Have either of you gotten to that point where you're looking at that as well?
That is a great question, and we do certainly recognize that there are so many differences within that category of the population of Hispanic, Latino, Latinx. There are a lot of differences in that, and we will be definitely looking at that as we look at supports that we need to provide for those students in those categories.
Thank you.
And I would just add that our numbers are really low in terms of that population. And we haven't addressed it the way it seems like, Andrew Steen, that your college is addressing it in terms of looking at increasing those numbers. But that is something that we will be looking at. There are lots of conversations going on, including they did have voice in our student survey, which we're very pleased with the numbers of students that completed that survey. And right now we're really beginning to parse it out with our PRE evaluators and look at those numbers. And those are going to help us in terms of really answering further our student needs.
Thank you both. We are poised to start the next session. So I'm going to call on the representative from Towson University to go ahead and share slides and otherwise present. And then I will start the stopwatch accordingly and signal as needed. You are currently muted, Patricia.
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Let me allow. Okay, it's saying I can't share my screen. Why is that?
That may have been the same challenge Andrew faced. I'm not sure.
Screen permissions. Huh. And I tried to test this earlier, so I'm not sure what happened there. Okay.
I assume you have a problem with whether it's entire screen or window.
Allow. I have blockers set, so I just hit allow. Let me try it again. It's saying dismiss again. Oh, great. It is not allowing me to do that. Barbara, would it be helpful if I perhaps sent you my slides?
Yes.
Wow.
So why don't we, while we wait for that, why don't we do a little flip-flop and we will let University of Maryland College Park, Dr. Dodge, if you want to go ahead and try to share your slides while I get Patricia's. And if others want to go ahead in queue and just out of safety precaution, email me your slides. I am happy to be the repository of the remaining presentations and can be a backup for you. So Dr. Dodge, are you able to go ahead and?
I'm going to do you one even better. I'm not going to use any slides.
Wow. Okay. Excellent. Great. Well, let me start the clock then.
Sounds good. Well, I know I have limited time, but I do want to take a second to express gratitude that we're focusing on DEI. We all know this is not easy work in any way, shape, or form, and so I appreciate having this time and space. So at the University of Maryland College Park, our formal definition of diversity is fairly straightforward and encompassing. Diversity is the full spectrum of human identities, backgrounds, experiences, and their intersections. Within my unit, the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, we further recognize that our work for diversity advocates a strategic balance of these factors as understood through the lens of institutional, societal, and individual power. In other words, we center the ways in which power dynamics at all levels impacts how diversity is enacted. Our incoming class for 2022 was for the first time over 50% minority, 50.2 to be exact. Like everyone else, we're preparing for the Supreme Court decision on affirmative action. I'm projecting that the consideration of race in admissions will be ruled impermissible, which historically has had a significant negative impact on the diversity of applications received, as is indicated through examples from both California and Michigan. There will definitely be challenges here as well, but I think we're also well situated to address that through our use of our holistic approach to reviewing applications for students. We also just launched the Terrapin Commitment. That's an investment that is going to provide up to $20 million annually for need-based financial aid for Maryland students, the largest single-year investment in needs-based scholarship in our university's history. That's going to ensure that tuition and fees are fully covered for Pell eligible in-state students. And our focus on that specific group is going to help advance our diversity goals. Of course, we want to ensure that diverse students are successful once they get here. We've instituted programs such as Terrapin Strong, which is an onboarding program for all incoming students and employees. And it's aimed at creating a sense of belonging and a Maryland identity, helping to establish a community that's bound by shared values. And programs such as this are going to take on increased importance if the Supreme Court ruling on admissions does in fact begin to impact other aspects of identity-based programming or even employment, as some pundits are forecasting. An important challenge we face that I think is being experienced at a lot of campuses is the rise in mental health issues, which impacts all students, but is particularly prevalent among underrepresented populations. We all know that when something impacts people, it has a larger footprint among minoritized communities, which have been dealing with additional stressors from day one. We're also seeing a huge increase in neurodiversity on campus, which we welcome as a valuable aspect of our diversity portfolio. Ensuring the success of neurodiverse students requires additional resources to ensure that they have the skills and tools that they need. Which brings me to the issues of resources, which is an ongoing pain point with DEI work. It's often difficult for units that are able to bring in financial resources to understand that DEI requires spending, often without generating direct income. We like to give our stuff away as much as possible because we want maximum participation. That said, the work of DEI helps to alleviate institutional expenses in so many ways. The most glaring example is by proactively preparing people to work within diverse environments and thereby eliminating lawsuits or other forms of complaint that can be costly in terms of resources and reputation. And that brings me to another challenge, which is the issue of what is being called cancel culture. Creating an inclusive community is incredibly difficult in the best of times, but especially hard in these partisan times. And we're working to provide as much transparency as possible about policies and processes so that our community members understand the basic tenets of free speech and other issues, while simultaneously asserting our values and creating some more spaces for dialogue and difficult conversations. We are a data-driven campus, and that's made evident through our new strategic plan, which identifies 4 primary areas of focus, all of which incorporate DEI. Just as an example, we recently did a survey of our staff so that we can determine how we need to position ourselves as an employer of choice, and of course, to do right by our people. And we also use higher education data more generally, which has led us to focus on the diversity of our faculty, which we know is an issue across the entire higher ed spectrum. Our family initiative, Faculty Advancement at Maryland for Inclusive Learning and Excellence, is helping us do that. And we're establishing metrics for the outcomes of diversifying our faculty. And that's a decision that's going to have a long-term impact on the entire campus. My time is probably up, so I will end there. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. We will go right into, let me just stop and reset. Let me share. So let me share the presentation for our second session, which is a tab.
All right. There we are. And thank you, Barbara. I'm sorry for that technical difficulty there, creating extra work for you.
No worries. Do you need me to make this be, I don't know what everybody's seeing. Oh, let me hit start slideshow. There we go. All right.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So I just like to focus on TU's diversity strategic plan and just give you a kind of progress review. At TU, we're firmly grounded in the premise that our ongoing success is dependent upon our capacity to shift perspectives and approaches and strategically place diversity, equity, and inclusion at the core of our mission. So I always like to say that my responsibility here at TU is to change hearts and minds. So I would just like to focus a little bit on our next slide with our TU, More Inclusive TU strategic plan, for which we have 4 overarching goals. Those four goals: education, scholarship, recruitment, retention, and success, campus climate, and evaluation and assessment. Next slide, please. So we are in our second year of our 2020 to 2025 plan, and I just kind of want to update you on some of the progress that we've made. Next slide, please. So in education and scholarship, you'll see that I have in green. I want to focus on the things that we've done. So in terms of that overarching goal of education and scholarship, one of the tenets is to provide ongoing teaching and learning experiences. And so some of the things that the university have done include developing and implementing an inclusive hiring practice for both our faculty and staff hires. We initially started that off with all of our faculty hires. So every faculty search is required to have what we call an inclusion advocate on that search team. We've advanced that now to not only our faculty hires, but our staff hires as well. And at one of my very last slides will indicate why we feel that that is very necessary. Educational opportunities are promoted across the campus for both staff, faculty, and students alike. 100% of our student population are new employees, including staff and faculty. They must complete an OIIE orientation or onboarding exercise. We work directly with the assistant provost for DEI with an inclusive classroom initiative. And then this summer in 2023, we are developing a 12-month DEI Academy. That proposed launch date is going to be in June of 2023, for which each month our office will be offering a session on campus to our campus community with various DEI topics and proposals. Next slide, please. A little bit more about our education and scholarship, increasing diversity-rich learning experiences. Wanted to highlight, obviously this isn't everything that we're doing, but in 2020 and 2021, our Career Center launched the Cultural Competency and Professional Development Grant Program, awarding scholarships from different majors, partnering students with employers. One of the things that we realized here at Towson was that we had several mentoring programs across the campus, but they weren't centralized. So we have partnered with People Grove so that we can kind of centralize our mentoring programs such that of all of our colleges across the university, our individual units across the university, the mentoring programs that we have will be centralized in People Grove, and People Grove will track who those mentors and mentees are to ensure that every student and every staff member who is seeking a mentor or professional development is linked with someone. Next slide, please. Also, in terms of our diversity-rich learning experiences, I want to highlight what our College of Fine Arts and our College of Health Professions are doing. So in our College of Fine Arts, they've developed a program, two classes, IDFA 201 and IDFA 471 and 571. These courses are offered once a year, and they're exploring art, culture, history, and racial legacy of the Baltimore region. Another course is offered once a year. In spring 2022, it was called Black in the City, and in spring 2023, it's Engaging Public Sites. Our College of Health Professionals, they have offered now annual training for their first year graduate students. In 2022, there was an increase. We're now at 219 students who received the training for social justice. And in 2021, when it first started, it was at 185 students. So this is the third year, and we've expanded that training as it pertains to health equity and focus areas to include 7 disciplines. Next slide, please. And I'll just focus here on what Cook Library is doing. We've launched a DEI Action Grants program, where we've awarded funding for DEI programming, hosting 9 programs with 810 attendees from July to the present that center focusing on just DEI. And we've also implemented a textbook lending program to help reduce the financial burden that textbooks place on underrepresented groups. Next slide, please. Recruitment and retention. We've looked at all of our protocols and our policies. We've implemented some changes. We've revised policies around events, especially with outdoor events, how it may particularly impact certain student organizations, and revising those policies so that they are not impacted in a way that's detrimental to them to being able to hold events on campus, because we recognize that certain student organizations were better equipped or had more funding and were able to host their events indoors. And a lot of our underserved population were having outdoor events, but we had policies in place that were prohibitive towards them and not allowing them to do so. So we had to look at those policies and make some changes on campus. Next slide, please.
You are past your time, so if you could wrap it up, that'd be
Okay.
great.
All right. So I initially stated that when we were talking about our representation, I do just want to share our representation slide. Our comparison from 2018 to 2022. You'll note that while we are very diverse in terms of our female population, our other than white population in our staff and our faculty hires, we have had increases. However, in comparison to our student diversity, we are much lower. And so that's one of our focus areas. And if you could just advance to the last slide and I'll touch base on that very quickly. Next slide, please. Keep going. All right, so this is the last one. In terms of what my role is here at the university, previously I served as the AVP of Equity and Compliance. So I do come with a compliance lens. And one of the focus areas that I have for my staff is the creation of an equity report, where we're looking at our MBE reports across campus, our student conduct reports, including academic integrity violations, who's being reported and who is doing the reporting. Hiring and retention reports, compliance reports, and internship and job placement reports. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. I have received several slideshows, so I will be on deck for the next round. For commissioners, we have about 3 minutes before we're going to start the next sessions. If you would like to take an opportunity to ask these presenters some questions.
Can I, this is great presentations for both of you. I guess my question I had is like debt burden by ethnicity or by race. Is there, I didn't hear very much about any, like in terms of exploration of how that varies from white students to non-white students, and if what is being addressed on the debt burden, at least it wouldn't matter so much for them being in school, but after they graduate. So you could speak a little bit to that.
Either one of you can go ahead and take a stab at that.
As each of our individual units at Towson University, we have an overall university diversity strategic plan, but each individual unit has also developed a strategic plan. So enrollment management is focusing on the debt ratio for our students and addressing what some of those deficits may be.
Yeah, and that's an excellent question. Thanks for introducing that into the conversation, because nationally, as well as at our institutions, the debt ratio for students of color does tend to be higher than it does. And in part, it's because of the types of debts that are presented to different families and the way that that's marketed. This is a huge problem for higher ed generally in terms of getting it, and not just higher ed, but also all of the ancillary services that are providing debt, including the U.S. government, in terms of addressing what type of debt is available and how it's made available and how it's marketed to different populations. Yeah, it's a really excellent question. It's a national issue.
Thank you both.
Other commissioners have questions?
Yes, thank you both for the great presentation. As two USM institutions, how has the best practices approaches been centralized by the system to help assist you individual institutions, but also how, as an institution, have you all kept your unique approaches to fit your community?
I'll go ahead and jump in here, Patricia. We actually meet with the system. All of the system institutions meet we actually have a diversity committee. So we come together and have conversations and discuss best practices and any other issues that are occurring in the state that may be impacting us system-wide. I think that there's also, of course, the informal phone conversations that go on between various institutions across the state as well as within the system. And then I know that so many of us belong to other types of organizations as well. In fact, myself, and I know that at least one of my other colleagues here on this call, we're very active with the AAU, which is right downtown. I also am part of the Big Ten affiliation. So the Big Ten Academic Alliance meets regularly as well. In fact, I co-host that group and we'll be meeting right after this one. So.
Well, unless you have something to add to that, Patricia, we will go ahead and queue up for the next set of sessions. We have, well, actually, it's Morgan State University, Tara Berrien. If you want to go ahead and give it a go.
Good afternoon, everybody. So can you see my slides?
We can.
Okay. All right, great. So hi, welcome. Thank you very much for having me today. So I wanted to talk a little bit about Morgan State's diversity initiatives. So here at the National Treasure, we are known as an HBCU, and I will say that diversity has always been a fabric of our community. So I say that because there has been this notion that diversity is somewhat of a new issue and that you have to able to embrace diversity. You have to espouse the differences of other people and like kind of erase your identity. So that is one of the pain points that I was going to get to later. But we do have a one of our core values is diversity. So along with leadership, integrity, innovation, excellence, and respect. But we do have a formal kind of statement that says Morgan welcomes and supports a broad diversity of people and ideas as essential to quality education in a global interdependent society. So noticing that it is focused mostly on students, that is another one of our pain points, is that faculty and staff seem to think that they are not being included in some of the diversity initiatives. And I did an informal pledge for some of our students as part of our CASA program, which is it's like a summer bridge program for students who have or financially or academically disadvantaged and have not yet been admitted, but they have a bridge program that they can go through during the summertime. But essentially to emphasize that inclusive piece, I've just had an informal kind of pledge for them that says I embrace diversity and include those who don't look like me, talk like me, or think like me. But going to the next slide, let me see the next slide. So going to our next slide, this past year, we had the highest number of students enrolled at the university. So it was approximately 8,500. So that is a steady increase over the years. And as we have gotten more students, we do have more Hispanic or Latinx students, and we have been drilling down to like the different cultures, like whether they're from the Caribbean or from South America or Europe, right? So we have noticed also an increase in the amount of graduate students who identify as white, that it particularly increased during the pandemic. And we believe that that was attributed to the fact that individuals can now use, there's this remote world, right, in virtual world. So we are offering more remote classes, and we have a Morgan Completes You program that is also geared to individuals that may have started school, but for whatever reason, life happens, finances, whatever, they weren't able to complete school. So this gives them credit for experience in the workspace, but it also allows them to take classes more remote as well. But we're also looking to have and develop more inclusive curriculum and programs, especially for those that are having mental health issues, and also to be more sensitive to those areas, because I will say that we are not there yet, but we are trying to get there to be more inclusive and sensitive to individuals' disabilities, mental conditions, or medical conditions, right? So we also are looking to establish more student organizations and provide them support and resources, which is a big thing, right? So we do have over 200 student organizations, and some of them have very inactive advisors on campus, and we're trying to find more people to get active with the university student activities so that the students can feel more supported in what they, oh, I realize I'm talking on. And then there was just some other things that we have. So we are trying to recruit in different spaces, such as in the veterans area. There's also an HBCU Pride organization that has recruitment sessions for students as well. And just as like I want to say not a low hanging fruit, but we also have started to provide graduation cords for individuals as symbols of representation. So such as members of our LGBTQIA community are given rainbow colored cords. I apologize. Let me run through. As I was saying, our pain points in no particular order are the campus buy-in, essentially from faculty and staff, indicating that they fear that their identity is going to somehow be erased if we engage in that. And how we've learned to overcome that is we're having these trainings on implicit bias as well as cultural competency. And also for recruiting for faculty, for all employees, there are mandatory trainings that every committee member has to go through. We realize that we have some options that are in silos, so we are trying to get them together. Right now, my office is essentially known as the Title IX office. We do have a diversity piece, but we are working to get more of our offices under this umbrella so that it is more of that proactive approach to DEI as opposed to being reactive to Title IX or any allegations of discrimination. And how we've been using data, I'll just run through, is climate surveys, focus groups that we're starting in January 2023. We also attended and are starting to join more organizations and just having like informal or formal conversations with our peer institutions just in University of Maryland, but also at Howard, Spelman, Bowie, and UDC. Sorry for the going over. Thank you.
No worries. The beauty of your session is you are all you. So it is now an opportunity for the commissioners to ask you some questions or the fellow committee members. So Bryson and Glenda. So if they want to go ahead and ask any questions.
Well, this is Chuck McDaniels again. You touched on this, but I think it's an interesting point to pursue. As an HBCU institution, does becoming diverse introduce some conflicts in your historical identity of what you define yourself as? I just wanted to elaborate on that a little bit.
So sure, that is one of the things that I was saying was one of the pain points is people think that being diverse means that we're going to erase our identity as a historically Black institution. But we're historically Black. We're always going to be that. We were offering the opportunity for individuals that had the lack of access and opportunity at predominantly white institutions. So we are never going to be like, we're never going to lose our history. And also, one point that I wanted to make was like back in 1960s, there was a documentary that Morgan did that I still show like little clips of. And it's very diverse. We talked about students that were in different socioeconomic areas, and also including students with disabilities in the classroom. And all of this diversity, and the word diversity wasn't used one time because that's something that we've always been doing. So I think that that is part of the communication and training that I want to get to, that even though we embrace diversity, we're not espousing and we're not erasing anyone else's identity in the process.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Yes, thank you.
I don't really have a question, but I have a couple of students that I mentor who are from Morgan State, and I got invited to a party a few months ago, and it was the group that they had together from Morgan State students that were alumni, Salvadorians, Albanian, white, Black. It was awesome, and they were very proud to be Morgan State. They were very proud. It wasn't. So I just think it's a real testament to like idea of like, it's not like bringing other folks. They still have the spirit of Morgan State, and I think it's a really cool thing. So just want to, not really a question, but yeah.
Bryson or Glenda, we have about a minute and a half if there's a brief question, or we can move on.
Okay, yes, a quick question. Thank you for the presentation. could you possibly speak to what Morgan State has learned from its student population, particularly African American and Black students who transfer in or come from the K through 12 education system, that informs the institution on what those students may have experienced at a PWI or at the K through 12 education system regarding equity gaps they experience or inclusion pain points they experience. There have been reports in the past from HBCU coalitions or groups rather who have sent out reports to PWIs and K through 12 educators about what they have learned from their students that may provide insight into those organizations or institutions to better educate their populations.
Essentially, especially since the pandemic, we have learned that our students love that we have a very supportive environment, right? So not a lot of times that there's things that are in policy or the procedures or under the law, but we tend to be very accommodating for our students, and we tend to listen to them as far as, you know, life happening. And a lot of them have experienced some kind of traumatic incident, particularly during COVID. We did have a survey indicating, you know, how did COVID infect you? Are you getting the vaccine? So forth like that. So just being able to feel like they have a voice, regardless of what their opinions are, that has been one of the things that we've noticed with the students.
Thank you. So just a reminder that as we, at the conclusion of all the sessions, we'll have an opportunity for a larger set of questions. And so if there's something that you did not get a chance to ask in this go round, there'll be another opportunity. So without further ado, we will move on to St. Mary's College of Maryland. Thank you very much, Tara, for your presentation from Morgan. So I don't know, Dr. Riveros, if you have session slides to go ahead and share.
Yeah, I will attempt. And you said for the PowerPoint, just hit the window and then hit PowerPoint.
You use the Present Now button, the little square with the arrow, and then you select among them, depending on the limitations of your computer.
And it has some limitations. It says it can't share the screen. I was trying behind the scenes to do it. I'll just, I hate to do it, but I'll back out and email it to you.
Okay, alrighty.
I can do it without the slides. I can do it without the slides. Let's just go.
Okay, all right. Let's do it.
And thank you all for this opportunity. I want to certainly thank Dr. Berrien. I spent 25 years at Xavier University trying to explain diversity to folks. So coming from the HBCU tradition, you got my support. I also want to give a shout out. I'm taking my 5 minutes, but this is who I am. Katrina Caldwell and I are buddies from way back. We both worked as VPs of diversity and equity at SEC schools. And so I appreciate the conversation about collaborative work. I'm brand new to Maryland. I'm from Louisiana, so a lot of what you've been sharing is heartwarming to know that we do have opportunities to work together. So I will share my presentation, and then at the end, I want to make some new friends. I could use the help and the love. I'm representing St. Mary's College. It says you on my screen. I hope you can see my name is Derek Riveros. This is St. Mary's College of Maryland. We're in Southern Maryland, just about 3 miles from the Chesapeake. The institution's definition of diversity is fairly straightforward. I've heard a lot of really good definitions, all saying very similar things. Our definition simply says individual differences, e.g. personality, prior knowledge, and life experiences. Group or social differences, e.g. race, ethnicity, class, gender, sexual orientation, country of origin, and ability, as well as cultural, political, religious, and or other affiliations. And that's quite a bit. We define diversity as broadly as we possibly can, because we recognize that nearly daily, there's another way in which we can identify folks who feel different. We also have adopted a phrase. Again, I'm from the deep South. I know this is up South, but for me, it might as well be the North. But we've adopted a phrase, historically underrepresented and or marginalized, to refer to our underrepresented students. We try to stay away from the term minority for some other reasons. And people of color just oftentimes mutes the conversation. So one of the phrases that you'll see over and again in our listings is historically underrepresented and or marginalized. It's a little more wordy, but it does more accurately reflect in many of our instances. Methods by which Our campus is preparing for the future and possible changes to the student body in terms of diversity. We have several targeted programs. One is the D'Souza Britt program, named after the first African-American to be able to vote in the state of Maryland, as well as the first woman, Miss Brent, who was able to own land and property in the state of Maryland. That program is targeted toward first-generation students, students from low-income backgrounds, students who are historically underrepresented and or marginalized, students who come from rural areas, and as well those who come from densely populated urban areas. The idea of that program is to try and, as several of you mentioned, some pre-collegiate work in the summer prior to their freshman year, but then ongoing academic work during the school years 1 through hopefully 4, with some very targeted programming, very targeted funding to help increase the leadership roles of those students. I'm very proud to say it's a very, very highly diverse group in all kinds of the definitions that I gave just a second ago. Our second program is the Sum Primus, which is Latin for I am first, and it is a first generation targeted program. That program looks at students, many times they look down the road at St. Mary's, it's the National Public Honors College, and think, well, everybody's ready and capable. We have a whole host of students who fall short. Even though they're academically capable, they're first in their family to go to college, and there's so much that they have to learn. And so we spend a lot of time trying to acclimate them and get them ready for the collegiate experience. And our inaugural class of cohort of students came in this summer. So far, so good. And the third program on the books, Men of Color program. It will be explained a little bit later as I talk about how do we use data to inform us. Examples of the most pressing and or challenging issues, the pain points, and the word pain really hurts, doesn't it? Those things that if I were younger, it would keep me up at night, but since I'm older, I sleep well. Your institution is facing, or in the areas of diversity, equity, and inclusion, the absolute biggest challenge, and I'm sure it's the same as I've heard already from my colleagues, is recruitment. And that is faculty recruitment is job 1, student recruitment is job 2. We have had terrible time trying to get folks to come to Southern Maryland to do the work of DE&I. I don't know if any of you have had this experience, but there's a new phenomenon in hiring, and that is, I can't think of the term right now, but you will offer someone a job, they will accept the job, they will plan to move, and then at the very, very last minute, they say, oops, I've got another offer. And you thought you had solved your problem. So I have seen more of that this year than I have in my entire career. So getting good people to do the work of DE&I, that's a challenge. Also, trying to diversify our faculty is even greater challenge. And all of you know exactly where that comes from. We've got work to do, folks, to increase the number of people from these underrepresented groups. Our equity gap is another huge challenge, and someone else has spoken to that, so I won't go into great detail, but it's very disturbing to see 15, 20-point differences in retention and graduation. The enrollment cliff is another concern, and we've already had conversation about the Latinx population. It is the only segment of our population that is growing as far as college age matriculation is concerned. And so we are actively engaging our Latinx communities to try and increase their participation at our college. Now, the last pain point, and the list could go on and on, but the last pain point is actually ADA accessibility. Our campus is old. It was founded in 1840. We've got some buildings that are still standing just shortly after that time. We've got some other buildings that were built in the 50s and 60s of the previous century. And so we have some ADA compliance issues. As recent as today, a young lady told us that she could not get into a building because the push plate was not working. And it's cold down here in South Maryland. I don't know what it's like in Baltimore, but it's beautiful, Barbara, but it was cold this morning, and we don't want people waiting outside of buildings. A quick discussion on how your campus uses data to inform its diversity, equity, and inclusion. We absolutely partner with institutional research, much like all of my colleagues here. We also have implemented our first cultural climate survey with completion in beginning of November. So we are having that data analyzed. We had tremendous turnout and support for that survey. So we're optimistic that we'll get some really rich data to help inform the rest of our decisions. Examples of how the college has used this data to inform decisions. The Men of Color program that I alluded to before. Imagine if you would, at this time, you'd see a slide with some happy men of color, but the Men of Color program is designed to try to close that gap. We have seen someone asked a question about diversity. Somebody made the statement, I think it was Glenda, about diversity within diversity. And so we see a very different performance level for our men of color versus our women of color in a couple of variables, including four-year graduation rates. Our women of color, particularly our African-American and Latinx women, are outperforming the college average. On the other side, our men of color, particularly African-American and Latinx men, are 12, 15, sometimes 20 points behind. And that's a very disturbing number. So we have on the books a Men of Color program that will target these individuals and provide more intrusive and intensive preparation to get them through to the baccalaureate degree. Two others, and then I'll stop. The Cluster Hire program, and that is a program where we are bringing in groups of faculty. Many of you are familiar with that. We're meeting with mixed success on that. I say mixed in that we have hired our first cohort. We got a little bit of diversity, but not the kind of numbers that we want. Again, it's the old recruitment problem that I mentioned before. And everybody has had a chance at strategic planning. We're in the midst of that as we speak. And our strategic plan, like was mentioned earlier, I think it was Dr. Dodge, that our strategic plan is complete with a commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. We have 4 pillars, and each of those is mandated to include throughout diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that's my time. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to give people an opportunity to ask you a question or two, but mindful that we'll need to wrap that up. So I don't know if commissioners or committee members, if we could maybe have 1 or 2 questions for St. Mary's before we move on to the MCUA institutions.
I was going to ask Dr. Riveros just quickly, in our DEI and MHEC's DEI discussions, we filter in geography sometimes in determining what expectations are reasonable in terms of diversity. You know, I've lived in Maryland all my life. I've only driven by St. Mary's like 1 or 2 times. Does the
actually, you
Yeah,
probably didn't drive by St. Mary's. Once you get here, there's not much more, bro. You probably drove to St. Mary's and turned around.
Yeah, well, I remember seeing the sign for the school entrance, so I must have been down there pretty close. But how much of a limitation is the geography and location in terms of what the reasonable expectation should be in terms of inclusion and diversity?
Sure. One of my standard definitions of effective DE&I is to represent the space that you occupy. So as a member of the state of Maryland community, our diversity numbers should reflect the diversity numbers of the state. And I don't really, it doesn't matter to me where we're located. We have that as a challenge and as an opportunity. For those of you who have not been down here, again, I'm from outside. I'm from Louisiana. This is some of the most beautiful countryside I've ever seen. It is gorgeous. I tell everyone that I've not seen a bad sunset yet here in Southern Maryland. We've got water. We've got all kinds of sports and recreational opportunities down here. But it is far for a kid from Baltimore. It is different, to try and find not just the geography, but try and find the kinds of services and experiences that you need. Finding a barber, a hairdresser, and things of that sort. They abound here, but you have to know where to go. And so, yes, that has been a challenge for both students and recruiting of faculty and staff.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we are going to save any additional questions for St. Mary's and that presentation to the end so that we can move on to Mount St. Mary's University. And I know I have as a backup your session slides, but why don't you go ahead and try to, Paula, to go ahead and share your screen. And you are currently muted. And you are now unmuted. Great.
Okay, and I should be looking at a window or a tab.
You are going to go to the square at the bottom that's called Present Now.
Right.
And you're going to click on it, and you're going to either use your entire screen or a window. Unless you've done a Google slide, you cannot share your tab.
You know what? Let's just let you do it because
All righty, let's
not
do
working. It's not working.
That's fine.
Thank you so much.
Sure. Let me find your session.
Thank you.
And let me, I think it's spinning, start slideshow. So you're just going to cue me verbally.
Sounds great. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm the Vice President for Equity and Success here at the Mount, and was fortunate enough to be able to hire actually someone in our office last year doing all the professional development and training. She's a director. That has been incredibly helpful. I also chair the Mount Inclusive Excellence Committee, which was established in 2013, comprised of about 15 to 17 community members, including students, but also representing different constituency groups across campus. We have about 2,000 undergraduates here at Emmitsburg and about 500 full-time staff. Probably about 150 of them are full-time faculty. And we probably are about 30% first-generation students and 30%, maybe even 33% Pell. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of background for who we are. We use the Making Excellence Inclusive model, which is the AAC and U framework, and similar, quite frankly, to Derek, what he just shared with us at St. Mary's College. So individual differences are important to us, and also the group and social differences, and you can see those different classifications. Inclusion is just the active intention on ongoing engagement with all that diversity. It's in the curriculum, it's a co-curriculum, it's in communities. And it's at the bottom line is it's ways that increase awareness, content knowledge, cognitive sophistication, and empathic understanding of the complex ways individuals interact within systems and institutions. And that's real important because people ask over and over again, where are we doing this work? That's part of it, and helping to build some cultural competence, not only with our faculty and staff, but clearly with our students. And then equity, the creation of opportunities for historically underserved populations to have equal access to and participation in educational programs that are capable of closing the equity gaps in student success and completion. And we really try to take that seriously. The road, as I call the road to cultural competence, is trying to build folks' knowledge, awareness, multicultural skills so they get to the point of being able to be daily competent in those areas. Could you please next slide? I thought it would be helpful for you. We've always been data driven in this world of DEI because I feel like that's about the only way that you can keep your job. I'm kidding, but it really is serious so that people can see what it is you're trying to do and to be transparent in all of that. So I thought you might find it interesting that we are 43% students of color here at the Mount. When I arrived in 2012, we were 25%. So we have grown pretty rapidly over the course of time. You can see the Black and African American population is at 21% and then 13% for Hispanics. Next slide, please. And I thought I always show this next number in raw numbers because I think it's hard to imagine when you're on a campus with almost 2,000 students, 400 of them walking around campus that are Black or African American is very noticeable. And folks have noticed that over a course of time. And so that can be good and that can be bad. The visibility you think would help people would become more accepting and inviting and welcoming. And yet at the same time, people are saying, why are you so diverse? They don't say that to me, but I know that those are some of the conversations that folks had. Next slide, please. Using data again, one of the things that are important, we have the gaps just like most of you were talking about. You can see our students of color have lower first-year retention rates than our white students. We've been tracking it. We will continue to track it. That is what seems like it gets people moving. Next slide, and we'll look at the 4-year graduation rates. Again, too big of a gap, 10 to 18% over time. And you can see where we're headed fiscal year 17, which is our graduating class, obviously of 21. Next slide. These are the documents that guide our work. We are in our second iteration of a 5-year DEI strategic plan, but when we had a racist incident happen right before COVID in 2020, on the right-hand side, you'll see courageous dialogue and meaningful action. That is now a task force document. And if you'll go to the next slide, that document Well, here's the university strategic plan, the goals, culture of teamwork. Then it gets into 6.2, which is diversity inclusion. So it's really important that we're living in the strategic plan. And I've noticed that that's how we're able to get most of our work done. And the 4 areas that we concentrate on, you can see access and success, climate, intergroup relations, education, and scholarship. If you can go to the next slide, there's a brief definition of each of those. So really the first one's equitable outcomes and success for students, and that's usually a lot of our professional development, welcoming climate and how students get along with students, education and scholarships, pedagogy and curriculum, and institution viability gets at all of our recruiting and retention, marketing, communication, all the other vice president offices that don't have to do with student life in the provost. Next slide. We have this DEI task force. There was an incident that happened. There were 100 community members that served on a task force when we came back at fall of 2020, and we created these 59 initiatives, and that's what drives everything that we're doing now. It really helped because we do have a 5-year DEI plan, but this has really helped prioritize those initiatives. So we have urgent, priority, and important. There's like 49 initiatives, and we've been working on all of them over the course of the past year. Next slide. We have a way, this is just a slide to show you, we have a way of holding everybody accountable. I meet with each of those urgent and priority groups once a semester for updates on their work that they're doing on each of those initiatives. And then we have a way with our institutional research office to track how far along people are in each of their initiatives. And the leads have to respond to all of this. And I think you can hit the last slide. The last slide, our page. Now, this was just a way, we now have a certificate program to get faculty employees in particular to become more competent. And so we just have a way that we offer a lot of professional development. They need to take about 8 to 9 hours. They get to a certain point, they get a certificate. And the last slide will be just some of our pains. Student debt is huge. Our BIPOC belonging, both students and employees. And a lot of that actually comes from microaggressions, professional development, and all of those areas. Intergroup relations, how students are treating students, and the cancel culture and all of that. And I could keep on going, obviously, but I do think I put the first few are probably the ones that are most important. And remember, we are a religious institution, so we do track our Catholic and our non-Catholic students, and we do see differences, and we now have identified students less than 50%. And that's pretty remarkable. When I came, it was 75%. That's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We're going to go ahead and move right into Dr. Caldwell's presentation from Johns Hopkins University.
Thank you all so much. And I've tried several times to come off of the camera to open to start my camera, but it's not working. So my apologies for that. I'll also say by introduction, you also got a chance to see how awesome it is to work with Derek Riveras. And also shout out to Georgina, who in terms of collaboration, I have the opportunity to work with AAU, and I look forward to working with many of you. It's been I've been at Hopkins only for a short period of time, but I'm going to share, I've spent my first 2 years really working on our diversity strategic plan. So I'm hoping that I'm able to pull this up. Let me know if you can see it.
We can see it if you
Okay.
there you go. Perfect.
Alrighty. So,
All right.
As I said, Katrina Caldwell, and I've been in this role for 2 years. We also use the Inclusive Excellence Model from AAC&U, and we've used it to introduce this concept of how it relates to Hopkins' strengths. And so you'll see in the white area in the diagram, our research and innovation, institutional accountability, leveraging resources, and building capacity are the ways that we're trying to focus those elements of the Inclusive Excellence Model. And I'll talk to some detail about some of these as I go through the process. As I've shared, we've spent the last 2 years working on our diversity and inclusion plan. Before my arrival at Hopkins, there had been a chief diversity officer, but there was a 2-year gap between that person's departure and my arrival. So in a lot of ways, even though Hopkins has invested in the D&I space for the last 8 to 10 years, we really haven't had the kind of leadership that we need to move the efforts forward. So I'm happy to be a part of that team and that effort. Our second strategic plan follows our first plan, which began in 2015 and wrapped up in 2021. And so we've launched our second plan this fall. We developed our university statement of principles on diversity, equity, and inclusion as you read all of these words, it addresses some of the exact same issues that have already been acknowledged by my peers in terms of looking at both individual and group identities as they relate to structural inequities, structural access and opportunities, how we connect our academic research and public service mission to diversity, equity, inclusion has been a core principle that we're moving forward. Also, the ways in which we think of those individual identities as they're listed here, as they relate to the structural inequities that those different identities have, that those have reached. And then what is the importance of an institution like Hopkins in this conversation space? Our roadmap is our 5-year institutional promise. Is an expression of our values. It's proactive, data-driven, strategic approach to D&I. It is very aspirational in its vision, and we have not included anything in our plan that we have not already figured out how to pay for. So the budget is already solidified in terms of the investment in our goals over the next 5 years. And as we all know, diversity, equity, inclusion is everyone's responsibility. Here are the 6 structures for inquiry and review that we, at the end of our 5-year process, will be able to look back to say, how do our people look different? How are our pathways different? How are our partnerships different? How is our pedagogy different? How are our policies and platforms different? And how is the participation different on our campus? And we're using multiplicity of tools to assess our baseline, where we currently are across these 6 structures of inquiry and review, and where we would like to be institutionally over the next 5 years. So one example of the way we use data, if anyone goes to Hopkins website and they put in the composition report, faculty composition report, staff composition report, every 2 years, we have a report on our composition. And for instance, our faculty composition report will drill down to the department so that you can see if there are departments that have no underrepresented members from underrepresented groups around racial and ethnic diversity, and also sex, biological sex. We are working on changing these or adding elements to these composition reports, the equity and inclusion elements. And so I'll talk about that in a second. But right now we have these these reports for our faculty, staff, and graduate students. And moving forward, we will have a report on undergraduate students. And this is every other year we provide those reports in addition to our dashboard. So we use these reports and our affirmative action plan to drive our goals towards our diversity efforts, towards our people, our composition on our campus. Some of the challenges that we're facing, many of you have already talked about these before. The one that I'll add is relationship with Baltimore. We owe a great debt of our resources and our influence in Baltimore, and working on that relationship is a huge part of the work that I'm doing. The demands for universities to respond to social political issues and incidents. And so this sort of inside out perspective about what universities offer to larger conversations that are happening nationally. People have already talked about faculty diversity and retention and graduate student diversity and climate. And this is the other place that I'll talk about. Many of you already said you're doing climate studies, and we are conducting a climate study as well this spring. Some of the other prioritized projects are building infrastructure and staffing investment in my office. We have a faculty diversity initiative that is built on a cluster hiring model. We also have a focus on providing more supports for our faculty with disabilities, and we have a post-bac program. There's some innovations. I talked about community innovations. I talked about the importance of community, but we have an innovations fund for individuals to develop projects to look at ways that we can continue to support our efforts in Baltimore. We have governance, and governance is also an issue that Hopkins, as a very decentralized institution, is looking at. How do we build stronger staff and student voices, or bodies for staff and student voices? And we have a Vivian Thomas Scholars Initiative, which is a $150 million initiative to increase diversity in our STEM graduate programs. So on that, I'll yield my time. Thank you.
Thank you. So I will, as we have with the other presenters, give an opportunity for the committee members to ask questions of both of you in regard to your presentations, and then we will segue into a larger conversation amongst all attendees. So I invite yet again the committee members to ask some questions of these two presenters.
I just had a quick question. I noticed, I mean, great work all around. But I think the one question I had is like in terms of like composition reports or climate reports, or just studies that are being done. What is if you're wanting to do that at your institution, where do you model that from? Is it a consultant that you hire and that's done it in other schools? If so, and do you look at what schools are similar to your institutions? Because what I'm trying to get at is like, what is there like a hub, like a resource hub that is available to say, well, if you want to do a climate study, this is what it could look like. If you want to do a composition report, this is what it could look like. Is there anything like that that's available that you might have used at your institution?
Yeah, so I would say there are two ways I would respond to that question. So many of us are a part of the National Association of Diversity Officers in Higher Education, and they provide a good complement of resources, curated resources around these particular issues. But I work with my institutional research folks and they collaborate with their partners. So our dashboard, for instance, is modeled after Cornell. So they work with their partners to figure out what are the best instruments that we can replicate. But I also spent much of my career in state institutions, and we always had to collect this data, and it always had to be transparent and available for folks to look at. So I think state institutions is another good model for transparency in data.
And quite frankly, I'm connected with Nadi. Everything that she just said, and I used to even be with Publix too, Ohio State, Bowling Green, and that. So you always were very, very transparent about your data. So I would say that to Nadi. But what we try to do this year, working directly with the Institutional Research Office, is that we've had the student climate survey that we do every 3 years. Now we're doing every 2 years. And so we're trying to model the faculty one really closely after that one as well. But they're helping us do that. That's the only thing I have to add, but Katrina was right on target from my experiences too.
Other questions from our committee? Go ahead.
Yes, I did have a question. I guess it's a kind of more of a practical question about our thinking. And the inclusion part of our, I guess, my world leads me to trying to get certain parts of our society or underrepresented students into areas of study that they haven't traditionally pursued. Maybe students of color studying engineering at Hopkins, or you talk about the lack of psychiatrists in certain for people of color and things like that. Does the inclusion part of your thinking, and this is just a question, does it get to that level? Is that too far in the weeds? Do we have more challenges at higher levels than to start to think about encouraging students or non-traditional students to study things that they haven't studied historically?
I think that's an excellent question. One of the things that we do, and that's really important, especially in the sciences, we have a dean now who really recognizes the importance of mentoring. And we know that's one way we're going to go after it. But the other thing that is very intentional in this task force document is working with HBCUs to try to do some curricular partnerships, as well as faculty exchanges. But what I mean by partnerships, we're talking right now with Morgan State, and it's in the engineering program, and we're looking at doing a 3-2 because we don't have that. So we're in the process of that conversation. There's a lot that goes into it, as you can imagine, and we're kind of at some of those final stages that are, way in the weeds and kind of difficult to work through. But we have some intentional efforts for our students to see people who look like them, that are doing different kinds of majors and different kinds of professions and all of that. Because if you look at the data, I mean, you can see that it's like some 40%, 50% of the students across the country that are of color Black in particular, tend to go into the social sciences.
No.
They go into the criminal justice. And so knowing that information, knowing that we have, you know, a overrepresented group, quite frankly, probably at the Mount, we work hard at those kinds of things. That is not too deep in the weeds, we don't think, for us.
Thank you for that.
Sure.
So I'm going to give Katrina a chance to briefly answer that, and then I think we can then segue into the broader conversation. I want to acknowledge that Patricia Bradley has raised her hand. But if Katrina, if you wanted to go ahead and speak to Commissioner McDaniel's question at all briefly.
Ditto. I'll just say ditto. What Paula said.
Great. Okay. That fair enough. So we are now into the session that, as a administrator of the session, will be a little harder for me to manage because this is an opportunity for a larger conversation. I want to thank you all again for taking the time to do your presentations. Some of you have subsequently sent me the presentation slides. If you're so inclined, I would love to collect all of them. I think it would be of great use to the commission members to dig in a bit deeper on the good work that you put forward in your slides, because I know some of you ended up having to kind of rush through them as an aside. But there is no, other than the fact that we don't want to all talk over each other and we want to be respectful of time, we are now free to have a nice conversation amongst the commissioners, the commission committee, and all of you up until about 3:55. So I will interject as needed, but otherwise I want this to be as much as we can in a recorded Zoom call, have a conversation. So I don't know if there are questions that the committee members want to ask to the broader group. This is your opportunity to learn from all of these lovely people who've joined us today. And I don't know if, actually, Patricia, if you have something that you still wanted to share, I'm sorry.
I was just going to comment, Mr. McDaniels, I appreciate the question that you asked, because I had earlier last semester, I had a drop the mic moment, I would call it, that surprised me, because I made a statement about us achieving our R2 status and needing to make sure that we were intentional about creating a pipeline. And I commented that the higher degree attained, the less diversity you see. And it was like an aha moment for folks. And I'm like, why did you not know that already? And so we do have to be intentional in terms of, as we're creating more doctoral programs and we look at the number of diverse faculty members we have, and we ask the question, why do we see less diversity in terms of our faculty members? It's because they're not pursuing those doctoral programs. And so I just appreciate the fact that you recognize that and brought that up.
Thank you.
I know that we've seen historically too, again, the diversity within the diversity, that it looks like it's particularly Black women and Latina women are outperforming Black men and Latino men when it comes to the graduate programs as well. We've seen this trend for a number of years of particularly Black women exceeding Black men in terms of degree attainment, advanced degree attainment. And again, it speaks to our need to look inside the numbers at diversity within the diversity to make sure that we give everybody a shot at it. The numbers for the Black and brown women, by the way, are not staggering, but they are better than what we see from men. I actually had raised my hand a little while ago because I have a pressing question that I didn't ask in my presentation, and that is, would it be possible for us as a group or subgroups to be able to get together? I heard there's several opportunities already, but I think this is a good collection of cross-section of institutions that historically I have not seen. And it is refreshing to be able to share with my community college colleagues, with my HBC colleagues, private school colleagues, to bounce ideas off. I saw some amazing bits of information. I just wasn't able to capture it on the slides. But I'd really like to see if we could continue this conversation and if MHEC would be able to facilitate it. If not, Katrina will tell you, I'll get it going.
So I can answer the MHEC question broadly or vaguely, which is that I would need to check with our, I would want to circle back with the committee members, of course, and want to check with our council to see where this fits within sort of the agency's charge. So I'll put a pin in that request. Certainly what I can do is facilitate the sharing of the content that everybody brought forward and make sure that slide decks get to each other. But I can follow up with you, Dr. Riveros, in the
I
coming
appreciate it.
2 weeks or so to see what might be of possible in terms of continuing these conversations through MHEC.
And as commissioners, that was one of the questions that we had for all of you, is how much opportunity there is for you to interact and get together and share best practices and things like that. The community colleges seem to have a forum of DEI directors that do that on a regular basis, but there's some unique things about Maryland and some unique challenges, and if we put all our heads together, then perhaps we could move forward in a more productive way. I think, Maryland can really advertise itself as having wonderful academic institutions across the state, a lot of variety, and we hopefully, through better marketing, maybe could attract more faculty and things like that, more students, if we get together and kind of market ourselves in the right way. So it could be an opportunity for the future, and hopefully we can follow up on it with some kind of action.
Thank you.
And it looks like from the comments, there's other interest in that. So I will be sure to figure out the best way in which to kind of move that forward, or at least message that forward. But Anderstein has a question.
I just wanted to make a statement about getting together. Some of you may remember that we used to have a forum to do that, the Washington Regional Task Force, which was a group of all of the Maryland colleges that used to meet around diversity. And we stopped meeting a couple of years ago. But unfortunately, you remember, we used to meet regularly with all of the Maryland Community College, all of the Maryland colleges.
Yeah.
Pretty regularly. And then the leadership changed and we stopped meeting. But that was really a good forum for us to get together.
Who was that? Can you let me know offline who oversaw that, Anderstein? Or do you know what organization?
I know the last two presidents, but it was a separate organization called the Maryland. I'll send you the information about the
that'd be great.
Group. Yeah.
Thank you.
I was going to say, one of my learnings for this afternoon was appreciating the mental health issues, and I guess it was Dr. Dodge who used a real fancy term for the variety of
neurodiversity.
Yeah, that. And I think it's, when you think about the issues around our country and around our state, I think that's certainly not an issue that I originally dialed in when I think of DEI work, but it's certainly a very important component of it.
Yeah, and I just wanted to speak to that quickly because I just wanted to make sure I know I mentioned mental health issues and neurodiversity, within the same segment of my presentation, but I do want to ensure that we see them as separate things, because we do value neurodiversity. It's really amazing. We have students who are in our engineering programs who think differently. And that is so essential to making advances, within specific subsets of science. It's kind of incredible, and yet we have one individual, I'll speak to a specific example. He stares at people really in a blatant sort of horrible way. And, particularly with some of our young women, they're very uncomfortable. And so we started getting complaints about him. So having to have the conversation with him, and he's a brilliant scientist, but, again, neurodiversity, a different way of approaching social interaction, which is not, we're not going to put a judgment on it necessarily, but it's different, and so it has an impact on what people are accustomed to. So we're seeing more and more of that. And in fact, as we're also seeing a rise in different types of abilities within higher education as our population is becoming more diverse. And as students in the K-12 sector, are being supported and are able to move into higher education, who in previous years may not have made that move, and so we're dealing with a whole bunch of different complex issues. I'm glad you recognize that. And mental health is one of them, right? We are also seeing more students come into our institutions who are medicated than ever before.
And I just want to echo that our student roundtable, which is composed primarily of students, one of their top recommendation was for more mental health services, as well as having spaces on campus, each of our campuses, where a student who was needed a safe space or a space to get away would be able to go into this space, and there's a hotline available to call, a crisis line where they can get help or just sit and be quiet. And this was something that students developed. So that was their top recommendations, that each of the campuses have some kind of safe space for students like that, because they recognized that so many of their friends were going through mental health issues. So it was a top issue for our students.
Yeah,
I'll also say,
oh, sorry, Katrina, go ahead.
that's okay. I was just going to say, I also appreciate the acknowledgement that diversity is so much broader than some of the categories that we often think about. And why that's important, I think, for me, is that no one really said this on this call, but I'll say it, that many of our offices don't have the resources that we need to really address all of the demands on the time and the efforts and the resources. And we have growing numbers of students who might not have been traditionally viewed as marginalized or minoritized in our systems, who are now asking for more supports. So I'm thinking, for instance, of white ethnic students, for instance. So there are categories of students that are needing the support, and yet the infrastructure and the resources are not meeting that need.
Yeah, well
Glenda,
said.
I saw a raised hand.
Yes, I wanted to make two quick points. I wanted to say that I really enjoyed the diversity within the diversity definitions of diversity. I think they really honed in. I don't think there's a campus in Maryland that I haven't visited, honestly. And in my current position at MHEC, where I would work with someone on that campus. And so I really enjoyed that. This was a learning experience for all of us, I think. Just when you think you knew something, there was something else to add, something else to learn. So this, I think, has been a successful conversation in that respect. The second thing is, it's just a statement that what we're teaching our students is how we need to see the world. So I think it's so important that all of these efforts are in place and I commend all of you for your efforts as a parent. That is what you want to see. You know, I won't be here forever. I want better for my son, who's beyond graduate school at this point, but I want him in a world that addresses. And as Derek, as I think you said, that you had a simplistic definition. I didn't see it as being simplistic at all. It clearly talked about, we want to point out what differences are. You can't identify them, you can't address them, and you cannot move forward if you do not identify them. And it goes to the cliche, I don't see color, I don't see, you know, things of that nature. We need to. So I commend you for your simplistic, as you, to paraphrase what you said in terms of your definition. But I think this was great conversation.
Yes, Paula.
Yes, I have a technical question, actually. Not sure that this is the most appropriate place, but I'm going to ask it anyway. One of the challenges that we have with in the lines of contention are with our first generation college students and our Pell eligible students. And that is sometimes we're probably clearly about 55–60% of our students come from Maryland. And so the grants, the Maryland, what's that, GA grant and other grants, sometimes students don't get qualified until really late. And is there any, what's that process like? And is that just something that probably can't be helped just because of the timing of how those funds are distributed?
So that is likely beyond the scope of this call and very much dictated by law. Some of what your students may be facing are the barriers that has to do with how the program is actually administered. But you're certainly welcome to ask a more specific question to me via email, and I can share it with our director of the Office of Financial Student Assistance and see if I can get better clarity for you, so you're more well informed.
Thank you. Thank you. That'd be helpful.
Yeah. Commissioner McDaniels.
Well, that question just spurred another thought, because we, as a part of MHEC, want to know how we can support you better as a group. And we don't know all of our limitations, even as commissioners yet. But questions like the one you just asked, if there are things that you think that we as MHEC and the DEI committee could help organize, if you could send them to Barbara too. And again, we're kind of new at this DEI thing. There may be some things that we don't, but we'd like to at least look at it and give it a try if there are things that MHEC could or should be doing to help support DEI efforts around the state. We'd like to know about it.
Bryson, did you have your hand raised as well?
If we have a quick moment, yes. So it was very encouraging to hear about all of the focus groups, climate surveys, roundtables as the main drivers for change and making the unknown known. That is very encouraging to hear, and I commend you all for doing that work. With that in mind, how does your institution balance the often used phrase of, is the student college ready, with what many DEI practitioners ask, is the institution student ready? How does your institution balance those two ideologies?
I don't know who would like to take that up. Go ahead, Georgina.
The question, I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch it.
Yes, absolutely. How does your institution balance the often used phrase of, is the institution college ready, with, is the institution student ready?
So I think what Bryson's getting at is there's the traditional phrase of the student needs to be ready for college. We use that in variables describing, you know, remediation, et cetera. Right? Are they college ready? And this philosophy around the fact that institutions make themselves student ready is, I think, what Bryson is getting at.
Yeah, so I think, I appreciate that question, Bryson. I'll try to take a stab at it, and you can tell me if I hit it or missed it. But I do think for the longest time, there was this deficit approach to thinking about student development and student success. And many of us have pushed back on that over our careers to a more asset-based approach. And that just basically means that it's the institution's job, right? The system's job needs to be ready. We talk a lot about the, that the institution always needs to be asking itself the question of, if I'm going to enroll the X student, am I prepared to fully serve X student? And that should drive your investments. That should drive your enrollment management strategies, because we shouldn't enroll students we can't support, right? And so I think that is a challenge, but I think it's one that we always try to keep top of mind with our relationships with enrollment management, admissions, right? Our student success areas, and even our faculty when it comes to graduate students. Like, everyone wants to be a part of an HBCU collective, but not all of our graduate programs are ready to receive HBCU students. And so we just need to make sure that if we're going to recruit certain students, we need to be ready to serve them. So I don't know if that's where you were headed or not.
Absolutely. Thank you.
We have about 2 minutes left before we need to wrap up. I don't know if there's things people want to make sure that they say, or questions, or next steps that the committee members want to discuss.
I'll go again. I put a question in the chat about the University of Maryland's Equity Coaches Training Program. And I don't know, I just saw it on the website. I don't know, Georgina, if you know specifically about it, or if anybody else has any experience with that program.
I know a whole bunch about it. I actually am one of the trainers for the equity coaches. So yeah, and it's our ability, it's our working toward building capacity amongst the faculty within their units. Because often what happens is, if something happens within a department, they come to us, which is absolutely fine. But if we can start planting people within departments who can help them begin to address some of their problems, and also work as a liaison with us, primarily so we can identify issues as they're starting to develop rather than once they become a full bore on problem, then we're finding that really helpful. So doing a lot of training of a select group of individuals. It's in a pilot stage this past year. We've got about a dozen faculty members that we're working with directly. So it's very hands-on, and I'll be quite honest, labor intensive, but I think the payoff is going to be really great as well.
And so does it require is it virtual, or do you need to be in College Park?
It's for folks here on campus. We're focusing here initially as our pilot program, maintaining it to campus. And I'm working in partnership with our advanced program.
Okay, great. I can see over my shoulder, I've got a faculty member who has very similar kind of concern. So we need to do some work, but thanks. We'll talk offline.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk with you about it.
Excellent. Well, I wanted to, there are some to-dos that have come from today's session, and I will reach back out to people, but I believe there was a collective agreement that the sharing of PowerPoint slides is a good first step. And that some other to-dos that we will explore are the opportunities for further conversation. Secretary Fielder, I'm about to get to you. I just wanted to wrap up with my administrative tasks. And we will, as a committee, be meeting again and be able to discuss more about what we've learned from all of you and reach back out to you. And as I said, if not the coming weeks, then certainly after the new year, I should have a better idea of some next steps that we can take within the agency. So without further ado, I do want to introduce Dr. James Fielder, Secretary Fielder, who has joined us in this session. Secretary Fielder.
Hey, good afternoon. Just finished a cabinet conversation with the Lieutenant Governor. And I wanted to say one of the first things is I really appreciate everybody's efforts and works on this most important event. And I say an event because getting people together to talk about the frailties is what starts. And then as the last 7 years we've spent trying to identify, this is the efforts within MHEC at the staff levels and so forth, trying to identify barriers that have prevented further innovation and progress on many different fronts, including DEI. And some of our regulations, policies, application processes, all those things are embedded. They're historic, they're long-term. At the institutional level, what needs to change? We can identify them. If we can identify them, we can adjust. We can do things to change things. But the first thing is just thank you for all your efforts. And when I think about the diversity, I think, I'm so glad to hear Georgiana talk about the new program of equity training, because we look at it in our statistics that Barbara runs in research and look at the lack of diversity at institutional staff and faculty levels. And as you go from assistant to associate to full professors, you can see the differences. If you look in the hard sciences versus the not hard sciences, you can see the differences. Well, all those things are very relevant when you're trying to attract students. And the elimination of standards at the admission and enrollment management side doesn't necessarily add diversity. Sometimes it adds more complexity because the support systems and success efforts have to be there for those students. And if the institution isn't prepared to accept the student as it is, as he or she is, then you've got other difficulties. So we wanted this group to work on, and they're doing a great job getting into where we need to be at the institutional level so we can support and change things. We're not intending and can't get involved in institutional operations. We have to stay at the more strategic level, but there may be some policies and regulation that even statutory that we can work to change together. So that's what I wanted to say, Barb. I really appreciate everybody's efforts, and let's keep going.
All right, thank you.
Any questions before I jump off? I've tried to listen intently. Oh, no, no second question either. This is so good. I thank you all.
All right. Well, I will certainly be back in touch with everybody. And I do appreciate your time. It looks like we're seeing some thank yous and some exits as we wrap around to the 4 o'clock hour. It's been a great, fast 2 hours. I've learned a lot myself. I speak for all the commissioners when I say so. Thank you all for your time. Take care.
Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.